It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. These are our top stories this morning for you. Dominic Raab accuses a small minority of activist civil servants of plotting to force him out and trying to block government reforms. Civil service unions hit back, saying he's peddling a dangerous conspiracy theory to deflect criticism of his own conduct. Also ahead for you, the CBI in crisis. The business lobbying group suspends all operations after major companies quit. 30 years on from the murder of Stephen Lawrence, his father tells Sky News he still can't trust the police.
As long as they can't accept what they're doing is wrong. Because if you don't accept it, it's not going to change.
Health Secretary Steve Barclay says he'll go to court to stop nurses striking at the end of the month. In sport, a dramatic comeback for Arsenal as they draw 3-3 with bottom club Southampton, but its vital points drops in the title race. And at 1:45, we take a look at the papers with National World Cities Editor-in-Chief Nancy Fielder, as well as broadcaster Pete Price. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Well, former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has accused what he calls activist civil servants of forcing him out of office. Mr Raab resigned after an independent investigation upheld two complaints that he bullied officials, but he says some civil servants were trying to block policies they didn't like, including Brexit. And now the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is facing questions about his own judgment after losing 3 senior ministers in 6 months. Our political correspondent Joe Pike reports.
Have you got a new job?
I've no idea.
Just 6 months after he walked into government,
Maybe just going for a stroll down Whitehall.
he's out, but not leaving quietly.
Almost all of the complaints against me were dismissed. And what this doesn't give you, it's a handful of very senior officials. None of the junior complaints were upheld. And I got on and dealt with hundreds of civil servants, thousands of other people in prison service and the court service.
Dominic Raab argues there is now a low threshold for proving bullying, which sets a dangerous precedent. But 2 of 8 formal complaints about his conduct were upheld. His behaviour was found to be intimidating and unreasonably and persistently aggressive.
What I think this shows is the continual weakness of the Prime Minister, because there's a double weakness here. He should never have appointed him in the first place, along with other members of the Cabinet that shouldn't have been appointed. And then he didn't sack him.
Oliver Dowden, a long-time Sunak loyalist, is the new Deputy PM, and Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary. But fresh faces can't distract from another painful departure. We've now had 3 cabinet ministers leave their jobs in the just 6 months Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister, 2 of them for bullying. Advisers here will now be hoping most of this dies down ahead of the local elections in less than a fortnight. As for Dominic Raab, a ministerial comeback seems unlikely before the next election. And as his constituency is marginal, he could soon lose his job as an MP too. Joe Pike, Sky News, Westminster.
Our political correspondent, Amanda Acast, joins me now from Westminster. So, Amanda, Mr Raab's description there of some of the civil servants as activists, in this context, it's explosive.
Yes, so for a man brought down by claims he'd been intimidating and aggressive towards civil servants, Mr Raab, notoriously a black belt in karate, has definitely gone out fighting. After his bullish resignation letter, he then issued a whole series of interviews in which he made a whole set of different allegations against civil servants, describing them as activists, overly unionised, conspiring together to bring him down, and also deliberately obstructing government policy in areas they disagreed with, like Brexit and human rights reform. Now, this is a very serious allegation because civil servants are meant to be impartial. At the same time, they're also meant to be free to speak truth to power and give an informed opinion. And this really kind of highlights the difficulties of doing that at times. times. Now, all of this was a red flag to a bull to the FDA union, which represents senior civil servants already balloting over strike action, so relations not even particularly good to start with. They've described his comments as a conspiracy theory and said the Prime Minister should be doing more to defend civil servants. I think there is quite a deal of anger in some of the departments affected, that in the very warm tone we saw in the letter the Prime Minister sent back to Mr Raab, although he did say it was right that he had decided to resign, and the fact that he wasn't actually sacked before that happened. I think all of that really fans the sense that this is another front in the culture war, these allegations from some MPs that these claims by civil servants are symptomatic of a kind of woke culture, even though that's something that was dismissed within the report. Now, Labour and the opposition parties say the Prime Minister looks very weak over all of this, and he's got a big policy agenda to deliver before the next election, for which he needs the civil service on side. So he really will be hoping to try and draw a line under this as soon as possible. But at the moment, that's definitely not happening.
OK, Amanda, thanks for that. Good to hear from you. Well, Dominic Raab's resignation dominates this morning's front pages. Let's take a look closely, though. Raab quits in fury. That's the lead for The Guardian there. What about The Times? They say Mr Raab went down swinging in the face of what he says was a tyranny of subjective hurt feelings. The Eye, meanwhile, says the civil servants who worked under him, well, they're angry at what they call his tone-deaf resignation. And The Mirror, Bully Beef, reads their front page, calling his behaviour sickening. But not all of the papers are critical of Mr Raab. The Express quotes allies saying he was forced to quit just for wanting the best for Britain. The Telegraph reports in the end it was a row over a plan to put Spanish forces on the ground in Gibraltar during Brexit negotiations that actually scuppered Mr Raab. And the Mail asks if this was the day the country became ungovernable when a top cabinet minister was forced to quit for hurting the feelings of civil servants. Now, the Confederation of British Industry has suspended all activity until June after dozens of major companies quit the organisation. The lobbying group is in crisis after a second woman claimed she was raped while working for the CBI. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso has this report.
For almost 60 years, the CBI has claimed to speak for business, but that voice may soon fall silent after some of Britain's biggest companies rushed to end their association with the lobby group. The crisis began with reports of serious misconduct, including an allegation of rape against a senior manager at an office party on the Thames. Now, a second woman has alleged she was raped by two CBI employees working at an overseas office, triggering a flood of companies to suspend or end their membership, including NatWest, Virgin Media, BT, AstraZeneca, Ford and Meta, owners of Facebook.
The companies we're talking about today, they have deep values and they have leaders who follow through on their values within their own workplace. I think after a point, it becomes untenable for them to remain in a situation where there is a string of very, very serious allegations.
The CBI has already sacked its Director General, Tony Danker, for unrelated misconduct he says made him a scapegoat. Now the organisation has effectively frozen day-to-day business and signalled the CBI as we know it may be over. In a statement, the CBI board said, "We have taken the difficult but necessary decision to suspend all policy and membership activity until an extraordinary general meeting in June. At the EGM, we will put forward proposals for a refocused CBI to our membership for them to decide on the future role and purpose of the organisation."
John Lewis is one of dozens of household name businesses that have walked away from the CBI, and the government has already said it won't talk to the lobby group while investigations are ongoing. Without the confidence of its members or the ear of ministers, the CBI can't make the case for business and plainly can't promote best practice. Its future is in serious doubt.
The members who've called the CBI's fate into question will decide if it still has a voice in the summer. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
The Royal College of Nurses has accused the Health Secretary, Stephen Barclay, of trying to bully them. Now, nurses have rejected a 5% pay offer from the government, which has announced that it will go to court to try and stop strikes planned at 130 NHS trusts in England on the 30th of April and the 1st of May. Now, NHS employers wrote to the RCN saying the strike is unlawful because it believes its mandate for industrial action ends at midnight on May the 1st. Well, in a statement, Mr Barclay said the government firmly believes in the right to strike and it's vital that any industrial action is lawful and I have no choice but to take action. This legal action also seeks to protect nurses who could otherwise be asked to take part in unlawful activity that could, in turn, put their professional resignation at risk. Well, the head of the RCN, Pat Cullen, said the decision was nakedly political and nurses will not be gagged into this way by a bullying government. The government is now desperate to silence nurses rather than address this properly. And she adds, we want to be in the negotiating room, not the courtroom. That's from Pat Cullen there. Now, Stephen Lawrence's father has told Sky News that he will never forgive the police as he marks 30 years since his son's murder. The 18-year-old was killed in an unprovoked attack while he was waiting for a bus in south-east London. Now, the inquiry into the failed police investigation has found there had been institutional racism in the Met. It took nearly 20 years before 2 of his 5 killers were jailed for murder. Mr Lawrence was speaking to Sky's Siobhan Freeman-Powell, who began by asking about Stephen's aspirations to become an architect.
Looking forward to seeing some of the building that maybe he'll design and build all over the country. Unfortunately for me and my family, that didn't happen.
For 3 decades, the Lawrence family's life has been turned upside down in their quest for justice. A police investigation tainted by racism meant it would take 20 years for just 2 of 5 of Stephen Lawrence's killers to be jailed.
I keep saying to people that I've got so far is some justice. And when I say some justice, that means I want the whole justice.
And what does the whole justice look like?
The whole justice is to get all the other people that were involved in my son's murder to go and spend time in prison for what they've done. I think it would be really courteous for them, for me to ask whosoever is been sent to prison, did you actually kill my son? I want you to say, yes, I killed Stephen Lawrence.
And the police have a lot to answer for too. It was the report looking into the investigation of Stephen Lawrence's death that would go on to call Britain's largest police force institutionally racist for the very first time. And as early as this year, a new review found that not much has changed.
I would never forgive the police as long as they can't accept what they're doing is wrong. Because if you don't accept it, it's not going to change. We're still facing the same kind of attitude of these people who are supposed to be protecting the public. And I've made it plain to people, if something happened to me tomorrow morning or even now, who do I call? And if I had to deal with the police, I wouldn't be calling the Metropolitan Police because I know I wouldn't get the satisfaction of them treating me the way they're supposed to.
But Neville does acknowledge that for wider society, progress has been made. Progress carried by a new generation, inspired by his son's legacy.
For them to do things different from the way some of their parents were doing it, I'm feel grateful for that. The only thing that I'm not too happy about is that it had to take the death of my son for anything like that to happen.
Siobhan Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
Well, joining me now is former superintendent in the Metropolitan Police and former chair of the Black Police Association Charitable Trust. It's Leroy Logan. Thank you so much for joining us here at Sky News. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I just wonder if you would take me back to your reflections of that night and the weeks and the days that followed. I was 11 when that happened, and it was one of the very first time that a news story really affected me because I had fear for my dad who had dreadlocks, and my brother who was of dark skin. But what about your reflections?
Yeah, well, I was part of the Black Police Association, and even though I was based in North London at the time, there was definitely a sense of dread on, you could relate to the Lawrence family, and Stephen could have been my brother, my cousin, etc. So it had that real sort of relevance and hurt and pain, and this case has always been a touchstone for the black community. I'm very privileged, especially since giving evidence at the Macpherson inquiry into the death of Stephen. And I was one of the officers who said that the Met was institutionally racist. We got to know the Lawrence family, and it's great to have that sort of conversation with Neville and Doreen, because they gave their humanity such dignity, and they would challenge, and they wouldn't be gaslighted and said everything's fine. They always stood their corner, stood in their corner very strong, and it gave us a real sense of how to put ourselves across in the Black Police Association, and to not acquiesce, but to say it as it is, and because we're part of the black community and we speak up on behalf of the black community, and in particular the Lawrences and what they were going through. So it had so many overlaps with me personally. I think also, I'm of Jamaican heritage, similar to the Lawrence family, and so I can relate to them in that respect as well.
What did you make of the Lawrences', I'd say, dignified fight for justice? And I said to you while we were watching Shaman's report there, actually, you don't hear from Neville very much, but what were your early indications of their fight for justice? Well,
their grit and determination that they needed to know what had happened to their son. Obviously, they know he was killed by racists in the community, but why weren't they arrested? Because there was a lot of information at the time. Why wasn't this acted upon? And obviously they'd start to find out that there was collusion with the family, there was corruption, incompetence to some extent. And of course they realised that there was a racial element to it, and then they start to look wider and see that this wasn't just a one-off. The way in which Stephen's murder was investigated. And as a result of that, they sensed that there was a wider issue of institutional racism that needed to be addressed. And I think that's why Nelson Mandela, when he came over, he totally identified with the case. And as a result of that, he spoke up on their behalf, which really resonated with the Labour Party, and because this was the sort of mid-90s, and obviously the election in '97, they were voted in, and the Labour Party totally accepted that there was issues to deal with policing in a way that had to be addressed, and it couldn't be left ongoing and kicked into the long grass. It had to be dealt with, and I was really pleased when the Home Secretary Jack Straw announced the Macpherson inquiry, and it was a statutory inquiry, so it wasn't just another report or review, but it had teeth and it could hold the police to account. Because I truly believe there's nothing wrong with them. It can't be addressed by what's good in it. But it just needs the right leadership. It needs the right political will to hold them to account, to make it the police service more accountable and transparent. And it's very similar to police forces across the country. And it just really needed that sort of political will and independent oversight of not only the report, but the recommendations and how they were going to be rolled out. Because what gets measured gets done. And that was the important thing about those recommendations, because they made, they were a watershed in terms of policing and changing policing for the better.
So you fed into that 1999 Macpherson report. Talk to me about the cultural changes that happened within the Met Police in that 10-year period.
Well, immediately, the casual racism, the N-word, the P-word, the W-word, stopped.
Right.
So they realised, that the bad cops knew they had to shape up. And it created a positive atmosphere, so the good cops would call out the bad cops. Diversity, inclusion was, the golden thread going through so many different forms of policing issues. It had operational effectiveness. And I was able to show how complaints within the organisation were reducing, complaints by the community was reducing. Policing was a light touch. It wasn't a heavy handing. People felt the police were for them instead of feeling over-policed and under-protected. And it's because the independent oversight was there, holding the police to account through the Stephen Lawrence steering group, chaired by Jack Straw. It had Neville and Doreen Lawrence in that group. And I was one of the people, as chair of the National Black Police Association, to be privileged to be on that group. But I was also in the room when Paul Condon said, listen, these are recommendations. We've been called institutional racism. We will use it as an aspiration to be better, not to go into semantics or gaslight, but to say, listen, we can be the police service that the public demand.
So it's really interesting to get your thoughts then, finally, Mr Logan, on where you see the Metropolitan Police at the moment. We've had a recent report that said it's institutionally homophobic, xenophobic, racist. Is the right man in charge to push the Met into the place where it needs to be?
Well, I know Mark Rowley. He was in the Met when leading up to Cressida Dick taking up a commissionership. Sadly, it reminds me, the look and feel of policing reminds me of a pre-Macpherson era. It seems to be more of an occupying force. As you say, the Casey report showed not only that the certain units like the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Group was a safe haven for predators, you know, Carrick and Cousins. All of these people which you think never would happen if there wasn't the checks and balances, if supervisors were doing their job. They weren't being protected. There wasn't that culture of fear that prevented the good cops calling out the bad cops. And those systemic failures were being dealt with in a way that you started to see real significant change. And, of course, the political will was not there to hold the Commissioner and the Chief Constables to account. And that's why the Commissioner can say, oh, well, I don't believe in institutional racism. So that until you acknowledge you have a problem, you're not going to do something about it. So I don't think Mark Rowley is really equipped to deal with it, because he was there when it was going bad. You know, when they come through that culture, they're very protective. You know, they don't keep that critical distance, and they're not able to really do the sustainable change that's going to hold that police service, the Met, and the rest of the police services around the country to the level of integrity and ethics and professional behaviour. And, of course, getting the basics right. That's why the Met's in special measures, because they're not even just getting the basics right around how to police London.
OK, Mr Leroy Logan, pleasure to have you in the studio today. Thank you for your thoughts. OK, we'll have an extended interview with Stephen Lawrence's father, Neville, at 9:30, 12:30 and 8:30 tonight, so do tune in. OK, time now for the sport with James.
Hiya, you all right?
Yeah,
enjoying your morning?
It's going by quite quickly, I think,
Good.
James.
Ready for an action-packed weekend of sport, including London Marathon on Sunday, which I believe you have run before.
Yes, never again, I'm afraid.
Never again. It makes me sad, that does. That really does make me sad. I've run it once as well, and I want to do it again. I loved it. But look, coming up, we'll look ahead to today's FA Cup semi-final between Manchester City and Sheffield United. Pep Guardiola talks about a possible treble, plus a big boost for Manchester City's title hopes with Arsenal dropping points last night. All the drama from that game on the way. And we'll round up the tennis as Dan Evans makes it through to the semi-finals of the Barcelona Open. Good morning. We've got all the action from a drama-filled Premier League encounter between top-of-the-table Arsenal and Southampton last night. Plus, we'll look ahead to today's FA Cup semi-final between Manchester City and Sheffield United.
Brought to you by Vitality.
Oh, I think we're going to crash.
Sharing the benefits of healthy living.
Oh dear, that's not going to make the highlights.
But there really is only one place to start, and that's with all the drama from last night's Premier League game where Arsenal fought back from 2 goals down to draw 3-3 with Southampton, but it still meant they dropped 2 more crucial points in the title race. Now, Arsenal were behind after just 28 seconds, and Aaron Ramsdale's attempt to play out from the back presented Carlos Alcaraz with that chance to put Southampton in front. Arsenal were 2 down in the 14th minute. Even worse, it was their former player, Theo Walcott, who scored. And that led to the unusual sight of the whole team holding a meeting on the pitch. It seemed to do the trick, though, as Arsenal hit back soon after. Bukayo Saka's cross from the right was met by Gabriel Martinelli, who volleyed in his 15th goal of the season. Still 70 minutes left for the Premier League leaders to come back. But the Emirates Stadium was stunned by the bottom of the table side when Duje Chaleta-Char made it 3-1 to Southampton. Arsenal gave themselves a glimmer of hope when Martin Ødegaard scored 2 minutes from time. And then more late drama. Bukayo Saka scoring for Arsenal as they entered 8 minutes of added on time. Arsenal pushed hard for a winner and almost got it. Leandro Trossard had to go from range, only to hit the crossbar. A draw does move Arsenal 5 points clear of Manchester City at the top, although their rivals have 2 games in hand. A huge game on Wednesday night when the top 2 face each other at the Etihad.
I love our players more than ever, you know, because you make a mistake, you make another mistake, and then it's complicated when you are really fighting for what we are fighting, to turn that around and change the energy and have the courage to play like the one we have played. It's incredible.
We show character, we show a different variation of what we can do, and we are proud of the work and the ethics and as we did as a unit together, and that's the way that we need to follow from now until the end of the season.
Manchester City will have been boosted by Arsenal's draw last night, but the games come thick and fast for them, starting with today's FA Cup semi-final with Sheffield United. And manager Pep Guardiola has played down talk of winning all 3 competitions they're still in.
How many times in this amazing country trebles have done? How many years? How
That's why we get so excited about it. That's why we
how
get
many
so
times
excited.
is one?
Yeah.
You know, our neighbors, they did it in no say how many centuries. So we are more closer to don't do it than do it.
Is into the semi-finals of the Barcelona Open after a 3-set victory over Francisco Cerundolo, but the British number 2 had to come from set down to beat the Argentinian. He'll now face world number 2 Carlos Alcaraz in the last 4. We're back in the next hour. More build up to all of today's football is over on Sky Sports News.
Oh, look, a frisbee. No, it's a boomerang.
This is Sky News Breakfast. Coming up, as Dominic Raab wakes up to his first morning outside of government, we'll get the analysis of what his explosive resignation means from 2 former political advisors. Good morning, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories this morning. Dominic Raab accuses a small minority of activist civil servants of plotting to force him out. Unions report that he's peddling conspiracy theories. The Confederation of British Industry has suspended all activity until June after dozens of major companies quit the organisation. And Stephen Lawrence's father has told Sky News that he will never forgive the police as he marks 30 years since his son's murder. Well, let's get more on the resignation of the Deputy Prime Minister. A report found Mr Raab's conduct during his time in the Foreign Office accounted to an abuse or misuse of power that undermined or humiliated his staff. Well, here to discuss this with me are 2 former political advisors, Sonia Soda and Andy McKeever. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Where to start this morning? But I think a good place, Sonia, is just to talk about how Dominic Raab left, that resignation and, I suppose, the tone.
Well, I think it was an apology that was one of those apologies that's really a non-apology. It was very defiant. It wasn't contrite at all, despite the fact that in this report by an independent KC, he'd been found to have bullied colleagues on 2 occasions and that his conduct in the workplace was unacceptable. And it was essentially him saying, well, I'm sorry if anyone felt offended, but how was I supposed to know? And, the process was stacked against me. So it was quite an extraordinary tone of resignation letter in that response. I think it shows that he doesn't really think that he thought anything, he did anything wrong. And then we saw that in an article he wrote for The Telegraph and an interview he gave to the BBC afterwards. He essentially seemed to be suggesting that he'd been victimised by civil servants who had an agenda against him. But the thing that he really has to take into account is this was an independent report done by a KC, a very distinguished lawyer, who conducted a full and thorough investigation, found that there wasn't evidence, there wasn't sort of corroborating evidence to support some of the allegations against him. Doesn't mean that they didn't happen. It means that we don't know that they happened. But that his behaviour in the workplace was unacceptable on some occasions. And the KC who wrote the report, Adam Tolley, says that the civil servants brought their claims forward. They had integrity, they did it in good faith, and they had no ulterior motive. And yet you've got Dominic Raab, on the other hand, talking about activist civil servants and a conspiracy to bring him down. And I'm afraid it just looks like somebody who doesn't understand that they're a bully, doesn't understand how their behaviour is perceived in the workplace, the detrimental impacts it has, and somebody who's claiming victimisation and is in doing so undermining the independent civil service.
And Andy, where does this leave Rishi Sunak? Because what it feels like is Dominic Raab has left this bombshell, calling a minority group of civil servants activists trying to block government reform.
I mean, I think at the moment the story is probably more about Raab in the acute sense than it is about Sunak. Look, everybody involved in politics, even whether they've met Raab or not, everybody involved in politics knew the reputation that Dominic Raab had for really quite some time before. Whether individual complaints were upheld or not, everybody understands that he has been an exceptionally difficult person to work for. So I don't think there will be a huge amount of sympathy for Dominic Raab. I also don't think that at the moment there's a massive amount of blame pinned on Rishi Sunak. And I do think that in situations like this, we can overestimate the impact it will have on the Prime Minister and on the government. Rishi Sunak's already been through the Nadhim Zahawi issue and already been through the Gavin Williamson issue. So he's lost 2 cabinet ministers already. And of those 2 and now Dominic Raab, you would think that from the public consciousness point of view, because it involves money, and when it involves money and sleaze and the Tories, it can tend to be more damaging. You would have thought that because of that, the Nadhim Zahawi one would have been the one that stuck around the most. But actually, the poll ratings generally for Rishi Sunak, I mean, they're obviously not good, but the poll ratings generally for Rishi Sunak have been getting better and haven't usually been sidetracked too badly by these individual issues of cabinet ministers resigning. So my impression would be that this Dominic Raab story will hang around. It will contribute to the general issue the Tories have at the moment, but I actually don't think in an acute sense it will make a huge amount of difference to Sunak.
Lots of people saying, Sonia, actually, if you lose your number 2, it's a bad day in Downing Street, whichever way you look at it. And then we have to talk about, I suppose, the local elections. Rishi Sunak's first big test here, and whether any of this will cut through to voters.
Well, of course, it's a bad day when your Deputy Prime Minister has to resign because he's been found to have bullied colleagues in the workplace. And I think the other thing for Rishi Sunak is that this is the 3rd person from his cabinet, the 3rd very senior cabinet minister, the 3rd ally who's had to resign in under a year. There was Gavin Williamson. Again, there were bullying allegations around him. There wasn't an investigation. Nadhim Zahawi over the finances, as Andy's just said. And now Dominic Raab over a bullying investigation. And these 3 men all had things hanging over them when Sunak appointed them to cabinet. And I think it just shows where the Conservative Party is. I mean, I think some of it will cut through to voters, and I think some voters really do care about this. It's unclear how many voters whose minds it will change, though, given that we've already seen people having to step down from the cabinet because of bullying allegations. But I also think the other thing that it's quite symbolic of is the fact that, the Conservative Party Party is a party it really feels like in the end days of a government. They've been in government for 13 years now. Lots of more distinguished members of the Conservative government were forced out over Brexit. And this is a party really where, prime ministers are appointing people who've got some really dodgy allegations hanging over them and who end up having to resign months later. So I think it says something bigger and deeper about the Conservative Party as well, and the fact that it really is in a sort of phase of its existence where it's starting to look like it needs a long spell in opposition.
Well, one thing's for sure, whatever happens, Rishi Sunak can't afford to have many more days like this. Andy, wanted to talk to you about Humza Yousaf briefly because he'll be counting his blessings. There's no elections in Scotland.
Talk about bad starts for prime ministers or first ministers. It has been obviously a dreadful start for Humza Yousaf, and not of his own making at all. It would have been the same had Kate Forbes won, because really neither of those candidates would have had any idea what was coming at all. Humza Yousaf has come into government as First Minister of Scotland with the worst entry of any First Minister in the history of devolution. It's an exceptionally difficult job that he's come into, and by a factor of many, it is more difficult than his predecessors. So he's got about 18 months before he has his first electoral test at the Westminster elections. But his problem there is that his watermark is incredibly high. He has 48 seats out of the 59 in Scotland, and nobody on any side of politics thinks he can keep them all. So it's almost inevitable that he will lose seats and come under further pressure. So, there are a lot of problems for Humza Yousaf, a lot of problems for the SNP, although they still lead in the polls. At the moment, I'm sure Humza Yousaf will be thinking that the first couple of weeks could not really have been any worse than they have been.
OK, great to hear your thoughts, Andy. Sonia, thanks so much for joining us. Hope to see you soon. Let's move on to other news now. Well, security at the Scottish Grand National will be ramped up today after protesters stormed last Saturday's Grand National. More than 100 protesters were arrested at Aintree. That was last weekend, with some entering the course, but organisers said they had no evidence there would be disruption at today's meet. The local government association has called for candidates standing in next month's local elections to be treated with respect. A survey by the group found a rise in attacks on candidates, with 7 in 10 councillors experiencing abuse or intimidation last year. Over a quarter also said they felt personally at risk in the role. Firefighters have now extinguished this major fire that broke out above an Indian restaurant in Fife yesterday. Look at that. The fire spread through the top floor and roof of the property in central Dunfermline. No injuries were reported. Well, now to the great tomato shortage. You may remember images of empty shelves in the supermarkets earlier this year that were put down to bad weather in Spain and North Africa. But the number of tomatoes grown in Britain is at the lowest since records began back in 1985. Well, Alice Porter reports on one producer which has found a solution, but you may not want to hear it.
From sewage to salad. These massive greenhouses produce peppers and are mostly powered by heat from our waste.
So rather than using fossil fuels of gas or gas oil to actually create that heat through a boiler, the glass houses are, through a circular economy thinking, actually extracting the heat from here and using it to grow their crops.
The company says they're reducing their carbon footprint by 75% compared with conventional gas-powered greenhouses. And as long as people keep flushing their toilets, they have a stable supply of energy.
Traditional greenhouses in the UK use a lot of gas to keep them warm. But with energy prices having risen by more than 156% since 2019, many farmers are struggling to keep their doors open, which is why low-carbon farming facilities like these are so important.
And these growers believe it could be a way to prevent the empty shelves we saw earlier in the year.
We're heavily reliant on imported crops. Up to 80% of salad crops are imported from the EU and further afield. That obviously has the impact of water stress, energy, food miles, etc. We have a domestic solution here to that problem, growing within the UK, growing in an environmentally sustainable way with low energy use, renewable energy use, and low water use.
The investors behind the greenhouses say they want to build 40 more sites, but farms like these are not eligible for any tax relief on their energy bills and are calling on the government to be included in their energy-intensive scheme.
There are two options here. One is the consumers pay more for their food. I think everybody wants to avoid that. The other is that government allows the sector to be able to access its scheme. That would make a massive difference. At the moment, everybody is losing out.
The government says they have provided nearly £6 billion to businesses to help with high energy costs. But with farmers warning that food insecurity will continue, it may not be enough. Alice Porter, Sky News.
OK, coming up after the break, we'll have a full run-through of today's front pages, and of course Dominic Raab is on nearly all of them. All of that and more after the break. Well, let's take a look at the latest skiing snowfall, because we need to have a look at that. But we won't. This is live TV, my friends, so sometimes things go wrong. But bear with me, because what we're going to do, actually, and more appropriately, is we're going to take a look at the papers and we're going to review them with the National World Cities Editor-in-Chief, Nancy Fielder, as well as broadcaster Pete Price. Good morning to you all. Great to see you both. As I said, live TV, things sometimes go wrong. But Nancy, I wanted to talk to you about the front page of The Guardian, not talking about Raab, but it's these serious allegations then about CBI.
These are incredibly serious allegations. In fact, they've been sort of coming out over a few days now. This is the second allegation of a woman who worked at CBI who said she was raped. I mean, the details are absolutely horrendous, and she's claiming that the culture of support wasn't there. The sort of allegations that people were encouraged not to go to the police when problems came up. So the CBI has suspended everything for a couple of months. It says it's going to speak to everybody involved. Obviously prompted by lots of the biggest names who were members pulling out and saying they want nothing further to do with it, and they will come back together in June and decide if it's got a future. It looks in doubt now, though. The allegations are horrendous, and it feels like there's more coming out every day. So nothing positive for the CBI at the minute. In fact, it's closed down.
No, interesting, isn't it? The heads of John Lewis and Nat West, all big posts held by women, and they're trying to take that forward and, of course, making a stand there. Pete, shall we go to the other end now? And your story is quite interesting. Also, this is The Mirror, page 6, this is, and this is all about eating out and the cost of actually... well, you take it away. I won't take all your lines. Tell me about that.
You can have all my lines. You can even do the skiing report if you like. I don't mind. I'm made up with this. Dinner parties are coming back in fashion at home. And I used to be a caterer. When you two weren't born, I was a caterer. And we had prawn cocktails and we had Black Forest Gatto. And it was sensational. And I used to love my dinner parties. Well, restaurants are getting very expensive. And this article is all about this. And it is fascinating. And they're moving away. People are moving away from the casual kitchen supper and wanting people to dress for dinner and come more formally. I love it. I love entertaining. Well, I used to love entertaining at home. I had 6 ladies round who ate me out of house and home, drank me best port, and I said, "You're not coming back again." And now I've made my dining room into a lounge. So, but I think it's great that, because when you go out, you've got the taxis, you've got all the costings, and the price on the wine is scandalous.
And there's always the clock watching, I find. When you're having a dinner party at home, you're thinking, I've got the washing up to do. When are they going to leave? By the time I get to bed, it's gone midnight. I'm all for going out. Nancy, let's move on then to page 2 of The Times. It's all about motorways.
That's right. This is the smart motorways. There's been yet another inquest and another tragedy where somebody has died because there are no hard shoulders on large sections of the M1 and other smart motorways. Now, this is calling for not only no more smart motorways to be built, which the government has already said, but actually bring back hard shoulders. And the government's showing no signs of bringing back hard shoulders. And I live like 5 minutes from the M1. it feels hugely dangerous. You read these stories all the time, and there are tens of thousands of people every single day driving on motorways that aren't safe. They've got to be brought back. We do need somewhere so that if a car breaks down, you're not worried that you're going to die because they made a mistake. Smart motorway is complete nonsense. The name is the most ridiculous thing about them. But actually driving somewhere in our country thinking you're going to die because of bad design is ludicrous. No money should be held back on this. They've got to bring back the hard shoulder.
I haven't spoken to one motorist who says that smart motorways are the way forward. So, Pete, look, age is nothing but a number, and you've found that in the Daily Mail. Talk to us a bit about ageing.
They're saying that it's quite simply, if you relax, it will slow down the aging process, and you have to keep away from stress and strain. And it's an interesting article.
I'm ageing in this job, I can tell you that.
You're ageing in this job. Aging is keeping me young. I love working hard. I love stress. I love aggravation. I love doing this. And I tell you what, all those people that are upset with our politician because they're being bullied, that's going to age them as well.
OK. Nancy, I love this story that you picked out, again in The Guardian. Where do we begin with this? Pet parrots are allowed to make video calls to other birds. Really?
Well, yes, apparently. So there's been thousands of parrots involved in this research, which shows that they're much happier and feel less isolated if you let them do what are effectively conference calls like we're doing now. They could even had pictures on their tablets of which parrot they could pick. And so some came out more popular than others. It's incredible. I mean, it just shows that perhaps it's not just human beings who get lonely when they're on their own. And these poor parrots live all day long on their own when no other parrots in sight. And I think it's hilarious. I would love to see some of those video calls. Can you imagine?
Oh, absolutely. Guys, you've really kept me company. Thank you so much, Nancy Fielder and Pete Price. Thank you. We'll be talking to you in the second hour. Thanks so much. Well, still to come on Sky News Breakfast. Well, former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab accuses activist civil servants of forcing him out of office. We'll have all of that and a little bit more after the break. Stay with Sky News Breakfast.